The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of New Eden when the ships appeared in the sky. Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead and looked up from the harvester he was fixing. Three dark shapes hung motionless above the colony like storm clouds that refused to move. Lisa Carter's voice crackled through his radio. "All defense volunteers report to the town center immediately. This is not a drill." Jake grabbed his tool bag and ran toward the main settlement. Other colonists were already gathering in the square, their faces tight with worry. Ben Rodriguez stood on the steps of the administration building, holding a scanner that beeped frantically. "The ships are not responding to our communications," Ben announced. "They're not human vessels. We need to assume hostile intent and prepare accordingly," the crowd murmured nervously. New Eden was a farming colony with barely 3,000 people. They had hunting rifles and mining equipment, but nothing designed for real warfare. Jake looked around at his neighbors. These were good people who came here to build a peaceful life among the stars. Above them, the alien ships began to descend. Kethvar, Thane, stood in the command center of the lead assault craft, studying the primitive settlement below. The reptilian warrior was nearly 8 feet tall, with dark green scales that gleamed under the ship's lights. Cybernetic implants covered half his face, and his yellow eyes glowed with predatory focus. "Commander, the scans show minimal defensive capabilities," reported his subordinate. "These humans appear to possess only basic technology. Conquest should be completed within 1 standard hour." Kethvar nodded slowly. In his 200 years of service to the Zephyrian Empire, he had conquered 47 worlds. This would be his 48th, and likely the easiest. The humans seemed so weak, so unprepared. It was almost disappointing. "Deploy ground forces," he commanded. "I will lead the primary assault on their central settlement. Remember, we need some alive for questioning about their other colonies." The transport ships touched down at the edge of the wheat fields. Armored Zephyrian soldiers poured out, their energy weapons glowing blue in the morning light. They moved, with mechanical precision, just as they had been trained. Jake crouched behind an overturned tractor, watching the aliens advance. Their armor looked impossibly advanced, and their weapons hummed with dangerous energy. But Jake had spent his whole life fixing broken machines, and he knew that every piece of technology had weaknesses. The lead alien was massive, clearly their commander. He walked with the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. That confidence might be his weakness, Jake thought. "Ben," Jake whispered into his radio, "tell everyone to fall back to the mining tunnels. I have an idea." "Jake, you can't fight them alone." "I'm not planning to fight them. I'm planning to outsmart them." The colonists retreated as the aliens approached the town center. Kethvar studied the empty buildings with suspicion. Where were the defenders? Surely these humans would not surrender without even attempting to fight. His answer came when the ground beneath his feet exploded. Jake had spent the morning rigging mining charges throughout the settlement's underground utility tunnels. When the alien commander stepped over the right spot, Jake triggered the detonation. The massive warrior was thrown 20 feet through the air, his armor cracked and smoking. Kethvar struggled to his feet, yellow blood seeping from cuts on his face. His cybernetic implants sparked and flickered. No primitive species had ever managed to wound him before. Around him, his soldiers looked uncertain. "Spread out and find them," Kethvar snarled. "They cannot hide forever." But Jake was not hiding. He was moving. While the aliens searched the buildings, Jake used maintenance tunnels and irrigation ditches to stay mobile. He had spent 5 years on New Eden and knew every inch of the settlement. The next trap was simpler, but more effective. As Zephyrian soldiers entered the main warehouse, Jake activated the industrial loading system. Massive crates of grain swung down from the ceiling on mechanized cables. 3 aliens were knocked unconscious before they could react. Kethvar realized he was being hunted by someone who understood this terrain better than any scout report could have prepared him for. This human was using the environment itself as a weapon. It was clever, but ultimately futile. Kethvar had cybernetic enhancements that could track heat signatures and movement patterns. He followed the human's trail to the edge of the settlement, where the power generator hummed quietly in its protective housing. The human was there, working frantically with some kind of device. "Surrender!" Kethvar commanded, raising his energy rifle. "You fought well for a primitive, but this ends now." Jake looked up from the power coupling he had been rewiring. "You're right. This does end now." He connected the final wire. The power generator overloaded in a cascade of electrical feedback that traveled through every metal surface in the area. Kethavar's cybernetic implants, designed to interface with Zephyrian technology, were not shielded against human electrical systems. The feedback surge fried his combat systems and sent him convulsing to the ground. When Kethavar's vision cleared, he found himself tied to a chair in the colony's meeting hall. The human sat across from him, looking tired but determined. Other colonists stood around them, holding weapons that seemed primitive but were pointed steadily at his chest. "My name is Jake Morrison," the human said, "and you just lost your first battle." Kethvar stared at this unremarkable creature who had defeated him. Jake was average height for a human, with brown hair and calloused hands that spoke of manual labor. There was nothing impressive about him, nothing that suggested a great warrior. Yet here, Kethvar sat, captured and helpless. "This is impossible," Kethvar whispered. "I am Kethvar Thane, champion of the 7th Fleet. I have never been defeated." "Well, now you have," Jake replied. "The question is, what happens next?" Kethvar felt something break inside his chest, a feeling he had never experienced before. Shame. In Zephyrian culture, a warrior who suffered defeat in single combat was bound by ancient laws. The words came out of his mouth before he could stop them, driven by centuries of genetic programming and cultural conditioning. "I'll do anything," Kethvar said, his voice hollow with shock. "I'll do anything to serve my better." Jake blinked in surprise. He had not expected this response from the proud alien warrior. Around them, the other colonists looked equally confused. "What does that mean exactly?" Lisa Carter asked. Kethvar closed his eyes. His world had just changed forever, and he was not sure he understood how or why. All he knew was that he had been defeated by a creature his people considered barely more intelligent than animals. And now, by the ancient codes of his ancestors, he belonged to that creature. "It means," Kethvar said quietly, "that I am now his to command." Jake stared at the massive alien sitting across from him and wondered what he had gotten himself into. 3 days had passed since the battle, and Kethvar had not moved from the chair where they had placed him. The alien refused food, refused water, and refused to speak except to repeat those same words when questioned. "I serve my better now. That is the way of my people." Amy Foster, the colony's xenobiologist, had been studying Kethvar from a safe distance. She approached Jake as he sat in the administration building, trying to make sense of the situation. "His vital signs are stable, but I'm detecting stress markers in his blood chemistry," Amy reported. "I think this binding thing is real for him." "Jake, it's not just words." Lisa Carter paced behind her desk, clearly frustrated. "We've been trying to contact Earth Command for 3 days, but the communication array was damaged in the attack. We need to decide what to do with him before his people come looking." Ben Rodriguez nodded grimly. "The other alien soldiers retreated to their ships when their commander fell, but they haven't left orbit. They're waiting for something." Jake rubbed his temples. He had volunteered for colonial defense to help protect his neighbors, not to become the owner of an alien warrior. The whole situation felt wrong to him. "Look, I don't want to own anyone," Jake said. "Can't we just let him go?" Kethvar, who had been silent in the corner, suddenly spoke. "You cannot release me. I am bound by honor until death or until you release me from service through combat. These are the ancient ways. What if I just say you're free? Jake asked. Then I would be dishonored forever. I would rather die. Amy leaned forward with interest. Tell us about these ancient ways. Help us understand. For the first time since his capture, Kethvar looked directly at them. His yellow eyes held a mixture of pain and resignation. When a Zephyrian warrior is defeated in single combat by a superior opponent, the victor claims the right to the defeated. Warrior's service. This has been our law for 3,000 years. It prevents unnecessary bloodshed and ensures that only the strong lead our people. Pete Graham, a gruff colonist who had lost friends in the attack, spat on the floor. Sounds like slavery to me? It is not slavery, Kethvar replied with quiet dignity. It is acknowledgement of superior ability. This human defeated me using only his intelligence and knowledge of his environment. By our laws, he has proven himself worthy of command. Jake felt sick. But I'm not superior to you. I just got lucky and knew the terrain. You defeated a warrior who had conquered 47 worlds. Luck does not explain such a victory. Over the following days, Jake found himself drawn into reluctant conversations with Kethvar. The alien warrior answered questions about Zephyrian technology and tactics, but only when Jake directly asked. It became clear that Kethvar genuinely considered himself bound to serve, regardless of Jake's feelings about the situation. Your people will come for you eventually, Jake said during one of these talks. Yes, they will demand my return or seek to punish this colony for taking me. And what will you tell them? Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. I will tell them that I serve willingly, and that any action against you is an action against me. Jake was surprised by the conviction in the alien's voice. Why would you protect us? We're your enemies. You are my commander now. It is my duty to serve your interests. But Jake sensed there was more to it than duty. As the days passed, he noticed Kethvar watching the colonists with something that looked almost like curiosity. The alien seemed particularly interested when Jake worked on repairing the damaged equipment from the attack. Your people create interesting solutions, Kethvar observed as Jake rewired a damaged control panel. Zephyrian technology is more advanced, but it follows predictable patterns. Your methods are unexpected. Jake looked up from his work. Is that good or bad? It is why you won. Amy Foster had been running tests on tissue samples that Kethvar had provided voluntarily. Her findings were remarkable. Jake, you need to see this, she called him to her laboratory. Kethvar's people are incredibly strong and durable, but their technology integration makes them vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. Your power feedback trick didn't just disable his implants, it probably saved his life. A direct energy weapon hit would have killed him instantly. What do you mean? Their cybernetic systems are designed to enhance their natural abilities, but they create dependencies. Without those systems, a warrior like Kethvar becomes much more vulnerable. In a way, his defeat has shown him a weakness in his own people. That evening, Jake found Kethvar standing outside the building where he was being housed, looking up at the alien ships that still hung in the sky. They're beautiful, Jake said, following the alien's gaze. They are instruments of conquest, Kethvar replied. I have stood on the command decks of ships like those and watched worlds burn. Do you regret it? Kethvar turned to look at him. I never questioned it before. A warrior serves the Empire. The Empire expands. Weaker species submit or are eliminated. This was the natural order. And now? Now I serve a member of a species I was sent to conquer, and I find myself wondering if the natural order is not as natural as I believed. Jake could hear the confusion in the alien's voice. What changed your mind? You could have killed me when I was helpless. Your people could have tortured me for information about the Empire. Instead, you treat me with respect, even though you clearly do not want me here. This is not how conquered species are supposed to behave. Maybe that's because we don't see ourselves as conquered. Kethvar looked at him sharply. But you lost. Your defenses were overwhelmed. Your settlement was occupied. And then one guy with some mining explosives turned the whole thing around, Jake pointed out. I'd say that makes us pretty unconquerable. For the first time since his capture, Kethvar made a sound that might have been laughter. You are either very brave or very foolish, Jake Morrison. Probably both. Their conversation was interrupted by Ben Rodriguez running toward them with a communication device in his hand. Jake, we've re-established contact with the orbital ships. They want to negotiate. The next morning, a small shuttle descended from the alien fleet. 3 Zephyrian warriors emerged, led by one who was even larger than Kethvar. They approached under a flag of truce, but their weapons were clearly visible. Jake stood with Lisa Carter and Ben Rodriguez to meet them, while Kethvar waited nearby. The alien leader looked at his captured subordinate with what seemed like disappointment. I am Commander Zethmore, the newcomer announced. I have come to retrieve my student and determine appropriate punishment for this colony. I'm Jake Morrison, Jake replied, and I think there might be some confusion about who belongs to whom now. Zethmore's eyes narrowed. Explain. Jake looked at Kethvar, who stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Commander, I was defeated in single combat by this human. By our ancient laws, I am now bound to serve him until death or honorable release. Impossible. No primitive could defeat you. Nevertheless, it happened. Zethmore studied Jake with obvious disbelief. This small creature bested Kethvar Thane, champion of the 7th Fleet? He did. Kethvar confirmed quietly. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Jake could see the other Zephyrian warriors looking uncertain. Finally, Zethmore spoke again. The Empire will not accept this. We will take Kethvar by force, if necessary. Then you will be acting against me, Kethvar said, his voice carrying new strength. And I will defend my commander accordingly. Jake felt the weight of the moment settling around them. Everything that happened next would determine not just his fate, but the fate of every human on New Eden. Commander Zethmore's face twisted with anger as he stared at his former student. You would choose these primitives over your own people? Kethvar stood straighter, and Jake could see the internal struggle in the alien's posture. I choose honor over convenience, Commander, the same honor you taught me. This is not honor. This is madness brought on by defeat. Then challenge me and prove it. The words hung in the air like a blade. Zethmore's hand moved to his weapon, then stopped. Jake realized that even among the aliens, Kethvar's reputation commanded respect. I did not come here to fight you, old friend, Zethmore said finally. I came to bring you home. My home is where my honor binds me. Zethmore turned his attention back to Jake, his yellow eyes burning with frustrated rage. You have poisoned his mind somehow, human, but it matters not. In 7 days, a full battle fleet will arrive to claim this world. Your primitive weapons will not save you then. Jake felt his stomach drop, but he kept his voice steady. 7 days is plenty of time to prepare. After the Zephyrian delegation returned to their ships, Jake gathered with the colony leadership in the administration building. The mood was grim. A full battle fleet, Ben Rodriguez repeated. We're talking about dozens of ships, thousands of soldiers. Lisa Carter looked pale. We need to evacuate. Get everyone to the emergency shelters in the outer settlements. Running won't solve anything, Jake said. They'll just hunt us down. Amy Foster had been quiet during the meeting, but now she spoke up. What if we don't have to fight them directly? Everyone turned to look at her. She gestured toward Kethvar, who stood silently in the corner. He knows their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. We've been thinking about this all wrong. We don't need to be stronger than them. We need to be smarter. Jake looked at the alien warrior. Kethvar, would you help us? I serve you, Jake Morrison. If you require tactical advice, I will provide it. I'm asking if you want to help us. Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. Yes, I find that I do want to help. Over the next 3 days, Jake learned more about warfare than he had ever wanted to know. Kethvar proved to be a patient teacher, explaining Zephyrian military doctrine with clinical precision. Your people rely heavily on technological superiority and coordinated assaults, Kethvar explained as they studied tactical displays in Amy's laboratory. But this creates predictable patterns. A smaller force that acts unpredictably can exploit these patterns. Like I did with you, Jake said. Exactly. But the fleet commander will not make the same mistakes I did. Commander Veltar is known for his caution and thorough preparation. Amy looked up from her analysis of Zephyrian equipment samples. Their energy weapons are incredibly powerful, but they require significant power generation. If we could disrupt their power systems, the ships use centralized power distribution, Kethvar confirmed. Damage the main reactor, and entire sections lose functionality. Jake studied the ship schematics that Kethvar had provided. But we can't get close enough to their ships to attack the reactors directly. No, but you don't need to get close to everything. Kethvar manipulated the display, highlighting communication arrays and sensor clusters on the outer hulls of the vessels. Zephyrian tactics depend on perfect coordination between ships. Blind them or silence them, and they become vulnerable to the kind of unpredictable attacks you favor. Pete Graham, who had been listening from across the room, stepped forward. You're talking about taking the fight to them in space. Not exactly, Jake said, an idea forming in his mind. What if we brought them down to us? Over the next day, Jake worked with the colonists to modify their mining equipment for a very different purpose. The plasma cutters used to break up ore. Deposits could be recalibrated to interfere with Zephyrian sensors. The industrial haulers could be armored and weaponized, but the most important modification was to the colony's communication array. With Kethvar's help, they programmed it to broadcast false signals that would mimic multiple settlements across the planet's surface. When the fleet arrives, they will scan for population centers, Kethvar explained. The false signals will force them to spread their forces across multiple landing sites, dividing their strength, Jake nodded, and making them vulnerable to coordinated strikes. Nina Torres, the colony's communications specialist, had been working with Kethvar to understand Zephyrian broadcast protocols. I think I can do more than just create false signals, she announced. I might be able to jam their command frequencies entirely. That would be incredibly dangerous, Kethvar warned. Without coordination, some commanders might resort to orbital bombardment rather than risk ground forces. Then we make sure they don't have that option, Jake said. He turned to the assembled colonists. These were farmers, miners, and technicians, not soldiers, but they were also humans who had chosen to build new lives on a distant world. That took a special kind of courage. I won't lie to you, Jake told them. This is going to be the fight of our lives. Some of us probably won't survive it. But if we do this right, we might just save not only our colony, but prove to the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated. Amy Foster raised her hand. What about the alien ships already in orbit? They'll report our preparations to the incoming fleet. Kethvar spoke up. Not if they cannot communicate. He explained that the orbital ships were maintaining communication silence to avoid revealing their position to potential Earth reinforcements. They would not break that silence unless directly threatened. So we have surprise on our side, Jake said. At least initially. There is something else, Kethvar added quietly. Something I have not told you about Zephyrian military culture. Everyone looked at him expectantly. When a warrior is bound in service to another, their former comrades are forbidden from acting directly against their new commander. It is considered deeply dishonorable. What does that mean exactly? Lisa asked. It means that any Zephyrian warrior who served under me, or who was trained by the same masters, cannot participate in the attack against this colony. Jake felt a spark of hope. How many warriors are we talking about? Approximately 40% of the incoming fleet. The room erupted in excited conversation. This changed everything. With nearly half the enemy force unable to participate directly in combat, the odds suddenly seemed much more manageable. But Kethvar held up a hand for silence. There is a complication. If I am killed during the battle, the prohibition is lifted. The fleet commander will certainly try to engineer my death to free his warriors for combat. Then we make sure you stay alive, Jake said simply. That may prove difficult. I am bound to serve in whatever capacity you require, including as a frontline combatant. Jake thought about this. What if I required you to serve as a strategic advisor and coordinator, someone who stays protected while directing operations? Kethvar looked surprised. You would trust me with command authority over human forces? I would trust you to help me keep our people alive. For the first time since Jake had known him, Kethvar smiled. It was a strange expression on his reptilian features, but unmistakably genuine. Then I will serve as you require, Commander Morrison. As the week progressed, Jake found himself working more closely with Kethvar than with any of the human colonists. The aliens' knowledge of military strategy complemented Jake's practical engineering skills in ways that surprised them both. Your people have a gift for adaptation, Kethvar observed as they watched colonists practice with improvised weapons. In 200 years of conquest, I have never seen defenders modify their tactics so quickly. We're good at making do with what we have, Jake replied. It's what kept us alive before we had advanced technology. Perhaps that is why you were able to defeat me. I relied too heavily on my enhancements, on my superior equipment. You relied on your mind. On the 6th day, sensors detected the incoming Zephyrian battle fleet, 37 ships of various sizes carrying an estimated 4,000 warriors. It was the largest military force ever assembled against a human colony. Jake stood with Kethvar on the highest hill overlooking New Eden, watching the distant specks grow larger in the sky. Are you ready for this? Jake asked. I am ready to serve, Kethvar replied. The question is whether you are ready to command. Jake thought about the farmers and miners who were now preparing to face an alien army. He thought about Amy Foster, working frantically to complete her sensor jamming system. He thought about Nina Torres, ready to blind an entire fleet with nothing but modified communication equipment. I'm ready, he said. The Zephyrian battle fleet filled the morning sky like a swarm of metal insects. Jake watched through binoculars from his command post in the hills above New Eden as the massive ships took positions around the planet. Even at this distance, their size was intimidating. 37 vessels confirmed, Nina Torres reported through the radio. The largest ones are staying in high orbit, but I count 15 assault ships moving into landing formation. Kethvar studied the tactical display with professional interest. Commander Veltar is being cautious. He's keeping his heavy weapons platforms in reserve while sending only ground assault forces initially. Is that good or bad for us? Jake asked. Good. It means he wants to capture the colony intact rather than simply destroying it from orbit. That gives us room to maneuver. Amy Foster's voice crackled through the communicator. Jake, the sensor jamming system is online. Once I activate it, they'll be flying blind down here. Wait for my signal, Jake replied. He turned to Ben Rodriguez, who was coordinating the civilian evacuation. Are the non-combatants secure? All families with children are in the deep mining tunnels. We've got emergency supplies for 2 weeks. Jake nodded. The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. They would use false signals to draw the Zephyrian forces into multiple landing sites around the colony, then isolate and defeat them one group at a time. The key was timing and coordination. Nina, start broadcasting the false settlement signals, Jake ordered. On the tactical display, they could see the effect immediately. The Zephyrian ships began spreading out, adjusting their approach vectors to target what appeared to be multiple population centers across a wide area. Kethvar watched with approval. Excellent. Commander Veltar is dividing his forces just as we hoped. But remember, once they realize the deception, they will regroup quickly. The first alien dropships touched down 20 miles west of the main settlement, in an area where the false signals indicated a mining operation. In reality, it was empty grassland surrounded by carefully prepared ambush positions. Jake spoke into his radio. "Team Alpha, you're up. Remember, hit fast and get out. Don't try to be heroes." Pete Graham's voice came back tense but determined. "Copy that, Jake. We see them landing now." Through his binoculars, Jake could see smoke rising in the distance as the first engagement began. The colonists were using hit-and-run tactics, striking at the edges of the alien formation and then disappearing into prepared tunnels and caves. "Second wave incoming," Nina reported. "They're targeting the Northern Valley." That was Lisa Carter's group. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he watched more dropships descend toward their positions. "All teams, remember the plan," Jake broadcast. "Make them work for every inch, but don't get pinned down. We need them spread thin." Kethvar pointed to the tactical display. "The orbital ships are moving into closer positions. They're preparing to provide fire support to their ground forces. Amy, now would be a good time for that jamming system. Activating now." The effect was immediate and dramatic. On the display, the organized movement of the Zephyrian ships suddenly became erratic. Cut off from coordination with their command vessels, individual ship commanders began making independent decisions. "They're confused," Kethvar observed with satisfaction. "Without central coordination, each ship captain is reverting to individual protocols." But the jamming was a double-edged sword. It also prevented Jake from communicating with his own teams. From this point forward, each group would have to execute their part of the plan without further guidance. "Time to move," Jake said, shouldering his pack. "Kethvar, you're with me." They made their way down the hillside toward the main settlement, where the largest Zephyrian force was expected to land. Jake had kept the strongest group of defenders here, but it was also the most dangerous assignment. As they reached the edge of town, the ground shook with the impact of landing dropships. 3 massive vessels had set down in the wheat fields, disgorging hundreds of armored warriors. At their head walked a figure Jake recognized from Kethvar's descriptions. "Commander Veltar," Kethvar said quietly. The Zephyrian fleet commander was smaller than Kethvar, but moved with deadly grace. His armor was more elaborate, marked with symbols of rank and achievement. Even at a distance, Jake could feel the authority radiating from him. "He'll be looking for me," Kethvar said. "My presence here will confuse him. Zephyrian doctrine doesn't account for warriors fighting alongside former enemies." "Then let's confuse him some more." Jake activated a preset signal that triggered the first wave of defenses they had prepared around the settlement. Mining charges exploded in sequence, creating a wall of dust and debris that obscured the aliens' vision. At the same time, modified industrial equipment began pelting the landing zone with clouds of metallic chaff designed to interfere with their sensors. Through the chaos, Jake could see Zephyrian warriors advancing with military precision despite the obstacles. Their training and discipline were impressive, but it also made them predictable. "Now," Jake whispered into a short-range communicator. The colonists hidden throughout the settlement opened fire with weapons that Kethvar had helped them modify. Energy rifles captured from the first attack had been recalibrated to work with human power systems. Mining lasers had been weaponized. Even simple projectile weapons had been enhanced with guidance systems based on Zephyrian technology. The effect was devastating. The advancing warriors found themselves under fire from directions they hadn't expected, by weapons that shouldn't have existed. Several fell before they could adapt to the new threat. Commander Veltar's voice boomed across the battlefield in the Zephyrian language. Jake couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. The commander was angry and confused. "He's ordering his warriors to regroup and identify the source of the unexpected resistance," Kethvar translated. "He suspects that I am responsible." "Are you?" "Partially. But the implementation is purely human ingenuity." The battle raged for 2 hours. Jake found himself moving from position to position, coordinating the defense, while Kethvar provided tactical advice and translation of enemy communications. Despite their preparations, the colonists were gradually being pushed back by superior numbers and firepower. "Jake," Amy Foster's voice came through on a secure frequency, "I'm reading massive energy buildups from the orbital ships. I think they're preparing to end this with bombardment. That changed everything. If the Zephyrians resorted to orbital weapons, all their clever tactics would be useless. Kethvar, what would stop them from orbital bombardment? Honor demands that they not destroy a world while their own warriors are fighting on the surface. But if those warriors are in danger of defeat, then we need to give them a reason to keep fighting down here instead of retreating to orbit." Jake made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he had developed. "All teams, converge. On the main settlement. We're going to hit them head on." "Jake, that's suicide," Ben Rodriguez protested over the radio. "No, it's the only way to keep them grounded. If we let them retreat to orbit, they'll glass the planet." As the scattered colonial defense teams began moving toward the central battle, Jake prepared for what would likely be his final gambit. But he had learned something important during the past week of working with Kethvar. Sometimes the best strategy was the one your enemy would never expect. The consolidated colonial forces struck the Zephyrian positions just as Commander Veltar was preparing to order a tactical withdrawal. Suddenly faced with what appeared to be a desperate last stand, the alien commander made the decision Jake was hoping for. Instead of retreating, Veltar committed his reserves to crush the human resistance once and for all. The final battle took place in the town square where Jake had first captured Kethvar. This time, the stakes were higher and the odds far worse. But Jake had advantages that hadn't existed in the first engagement. He had Kethvar fighting beside him, and he had colonists who had spent a week learning to think like guerrilla fighters. Most importantly, he had Zephyrian warriors who were bound by honor not to fight against their former comrade's new commander. When Kethvar stepped forward to face Commander Veltar in single combat, nearly half the alien force was compelled to stand down and watch. The ancient traditions that had seemed like such a burden now became humanity's salvation. The duel between the two alien warriors was brief but decisive. Kethvar fought with techniques he had learned from both his own people and from watching human adaptability. When Commander Veltar fell, his weapon spinning away across the dusty ground, the remaining Zephyrian forces found themselves leaderless and bound by the same honor codes that had claimed their commander. Jake looked around at the aftermath of the battle. Human and alien bodies lay scattered across ground that was torn and scorched by energy weapons. But they had won. Against impossible odds, a colony of farmers and miners had defeated a military force that had conquered dozens of worlds. "It is finished," Kethvar said, breathing heavily from his exertions. "The fleet will withdraw rather than risk further dishonor." As if summoned by his words, the massive ships in orbit began moving away from the planet, their engines leaving bright trails against the darkening sky. Jake sat down heavily on the steps of the administration building and tried to process what they had accomplished. Around him, colonists were emerging from their hiding places, tending to the wounded, and beginning the long process of rebuilding. "What happens now?" he asked Kethvar. The alien warrior looked up at the retreating ships, then back at the humans who had fought beside him. "Now," Kethvar said, "everything changes." 6 months after the siege of New Eden, Jake Morrison stood in what had once been a simple farming settlement and marveled at how much everything had changed. The colony now bustled with activity, as humans and aliens worked side by side, building something that neither species had imagined possible. Ambassador. Lisa Carter finished her morning briefing and approached Jake with a smile. The Earth Defense Council has officially approved the establishment of the Interspecies Cooperation Institute. Amy Foster will be its first director. Jake nodded, watching Amy supervise the installation of new communication equipment that could handle both human and Zephyrian frequencies. She's earned it. Her research has opened more doors than any of us expected. In the months following their victory, word of New Eden's successful defense had spread throughout human space and beyond. What had started as a desperate battle for survival had become a symbol of something much larger. For the first time in galactic history, two spacefaring species were attempting to build a genuine partnership rather than a relationship based on conquest or submission. Kethvar approached from the direction of the new training facility, where human colonists and Zephyrian volunteers were learning to work together. The alien warrior moved with a confidence that Jake had never seen in him before. The shame and confusion that had marked his early days on New Eden had been replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. The morning exercises went well, Kethvar reported. Your people continue to surprise me with their adaptability. Several of the human trainees are already demonstrating proficiency with Zephyrian combat techniques. And how are the Zephyrian volunteers adapting to human methods? Kethvar made that sound that Jake had learned was alien laughter. They find your tactical unpredictability both frustrating and fascinating. Yesterday, one of them asked me to explain why humans insist on developing 17 different solutions to problems that have one obvious answer. What did you tell him? That having 17 solutions means you can choose the one your enemy least expects. Their conversation was interrupted by Nina Torres, who came running from the communication center with excitement written across her face. Jake, Kethvar, you need to hear this. We're receiving a transmission on Zephyrian military frequencies, but it's not from the Empire. They followed her back to the comm center, where a holographic display showed the face of a young Zephyrian warrior. Jake didn't recognize him, but he could see Kethvar stiffen with surprise. Veltar, Kethvar said quietly. My former student. The young warrior on the screen was speaking rapidly in the Zephyrian language. Kethvar listened intently, his expression growing more serious by the moment. What is he saying? Jake asked. He says that word of our alliance has reached the outer territories of the Empire. Several conquered species are using it as inspiration for their own resistance movements. More importantly, he says that many Zephyrian warriors are beginning to question the Empire's policies of endless expansion. The transmission continued for several more minutes before ending abruptly. Kethvar stared at the empty display with a mixture of hope and concern. There is more, he said finally. Veltar and others like him have formed what they call the New Path Movement. They seek to remake Zephyrian society based on honor and mutual respect rather than conquest and domination. Jake felt a chill of excitement and fear. That could change everything. Or it could start a civil war that tears the galaxy apart. Over the following weeks, more messages arrived from throughout Zephyrian space. Some were from warriors seeking to join the New Path movement. Others were from conquered species asking for human assistance in their own struggles for freedom. But the most disturbing came from deep within the Empire itself. The traditional factions are mobilizing, Kethvar translated as they reviewed the latest intelligence. They see our alliance as a threat to everything they believe in. Admiral Kane, one of the Empire's most aggressive commanders, has been given authority to deal with what they call the human infection. Amy Foster looked up from her research station. Infection? That's hardly flattering. It is actually quite accurate, Kethvar replied. Human ideas about cooperation and adaptability are spreading through Zephyrian society faster than the traditional leaders can control. From their perspective, this is indeed an infection that threatens their way of life. Jake studied the tactical reports that friendly Zephyrian sources had provided. Admiral Kane commanded a force that made the fleet that had attacked New Eden look small and insignificant. Worse, he was known for preferring orbital bombardment to ground engagements. "We can't fight a force that size with guerrilla tactics," Jake said. "Kane won't make the same mistakes that Veltar made." "No," Kethvar agreed, "but we may not have to fight him at all." He activated a different display showing star charts of the disputed border regions between the Empire and unclaimed space. The New Path movement controls 17 ships and approximately 3,000 warriors. Not enough to challenge the Empire directly, but enough to make a difference if properly coordinated with human forces and allied species. Lisa Carter leaned forward with interest. "You're talking about forming an actual military alliance." I'm talking about forming something that has never existed before. A coalition of species working together as equals rather than conquerors and conquered. The idea was ambitious beyond anything Jake had imagined when he first captured a single alien warrior. But as he looked around the room at humans and Zephyrians working together, he realized that the impossible was already happening. Ben Rodriguez, who had been quietly monitoring communication channels, suddenly spoke up. "We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command." The holographic display activated to show Admiral Robert Kane, a stern-faced human officer with graying hair and cold eyes. "Colonists of New Eden, I am Admiral Kane of the Earth Defense Force. We have been monitoring your situation with great interest." Jake felt a moment of confusion. "That's not the same Admiral Kane that Kethvar was talking about, is it?" "No," Kethvar replied grimly. "That is a human admiral. It appears both species have leaders who share the same name and the same aggressive tendencies." Admiral Kane continued his transmission. "While we appreciate your innovative defense of the colony, Earth Command has serious concerns about your unauthorized alliance with enemy forces. A full investigation team is en route to assess the situation and determine appropriate action." The transmission ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. "They think we're traitors," Nina said quietly. Jake felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. They had successfully defended against an alien invasion, only to find themselves caught between two different military hierarchies that saw their cooperation as a threat. "What do we do now?" Amy asked. Before Jake could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the colony. On the sensor displays, new contacts were appearing at the edge of the star system. Lots of them. Kethvar studied the readings with professional interest. 3 separate fleets. Zephyrian Empire forces from the Galactic North, Human Defense Force ships from Earth, and a mixed group of vessels from the Rimward territories. The New Path Alliance, Jake realized. Indeed, it seems that our little colony has become the focal point for much larger conflicts. Jake looked out through the command center windows at the settlement they had built together. Human children played alongside young Zephyrians in the streets. Amy Foster's research teams worked with alien scientists to develop new technologies that neither species could have created alone. It was imperfect and sometimes chaotic, but it was proof that cooperation was possible. "You know what?" Jake said finally. "Let them come. All of them." "Jake," Lisa Carter said carefully, "we're talking about 3 different fleets, possibly hundreds of ships. And we're talking about the first place in galactic history where different species have learned to work together as equals. That's worth fighting for." Kethvar moved to stand beside him, and Jake could see the same determination in the alien's yellow eyes. "I agree," Kethvar said. "This world has become more than a human colony or a Zephyrian conquest. It has become something new. Over the next several hours, they worked frantically to prepare for what would likely be the most complex confrontation in interstellar history. Messages flew between the three approaching fleets as each side tried to understand the other's intentions. The human fleet wanted to investigate and possibly arrest the colonists for unauthorized cooperation with alien forces. The Zephyrian Empire fleet wanted to destroy what they saw as a corrupting influence on their warrior culture. The New Path Alliance wanted to protect the symbol of everything they hoped to achieve. This could go very badly, Amy observed as they tracked the fleet's approach. Or it could go very well, Jake replied. For the first time, representatives of multiple species and factions will be in the same place at the same time. That's an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Jake smiled. To show them what we've built here, to prove that cooperation works better than conquest. When the three fleets finally arrived in orbit around New Eden, the planet found itself at the center of a tense three-way standoff. Each fleet commander demanded the surrender of the others, while Jake and his allies worked desperately to prevent the confrontation from turning violent. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Veltar, the young Zephyrian warrior who led the New Path movement, proposed a formal challenge under ancient warrior laws. Instead of a battle between fleets, the dispute would be settled by champions representing each faction. And who would represent us? Lisa Carter asked when the proposal was transmitted to the colony. Jake looked at Kethvar, and the alien warrior nodded with understanding. We would, Jake said. Together. The final confrontation took place not in space, but on the surface of New Eden, in the same town square where so much had already been decided. Representatives from all three fleets came down to witness what would either be the end of the interspecies alliance or its ultimate validation. Jake stood beside Kethvar, facing champions from both human and Zephyrian military hierarchies. Around them, colonists and visitors from a dozen different species watched in silence. This is how it should be, Kethvar said quietly. Not human versus alien, but those who believe in cooperation facing those who believe in domination. Win or lose, Jake asked. Win or lose, we have proven that another way is possible. The final battle was not decided by superior strength or advanced technology, but by something much simpler. When Jake and Kethvar fought as true partners, supporting each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses, they demonstrated the power of genuine cooperation. When their opponents fell, it was not just a military victory. It was proof that the future belonged to those willing to work together rather than those who insisted on fighting alone. 6 months later, New Eden had become the capital of the first Interspecies Federation, with Jake Morrison as its first human representative and Kethvar Thane as its first Zephyrian ambassador. The phrase that had once marked the beginning of unwilling servitude had become the motto of willing partnership. I'll do anything, Jake said as he looked out over the bustling spaceport where ships from a dozen worlds came and went daily. 2. Build a better future, Kethvar completed, and both of them smiled at how far they had come from that first desperate encounter in a wheat field.